Michael did not go right home after work. Instead, he headed for the public library. For a while, he sat on the stone steps watching a woman peel old posters from the window of the Taggart Travel Agency. It was far easier to sit there watching someone else than to do what he had come for, which was to read every article in every newspaper that even so much as mentioned the Ward case. Though part of him resisted, the part that kept him sitting on the front steps of the library, he told himself he had to keep on top of the case, one step ahead of the police. He had to know what they knew. It was a simple matter of survival. But he wasn't fooling himself. He knew he had come to the library to find out all he could about Jenna and her family. Not that he expected the newspapers to give a lot of personal information about them, but he didn't know anyone who knew the Wards, and he had no other way of finding out how they were doing. He glanced down at his watch. 5:30. It was Thursday evening. The library would be open until 8. The woman was no longer in the window across the street. Not much else was going on, nothing that he could use as an excuse. So he finally went inside, found the local newspaper from the previous day, and began to read. The headline on the front page loomed up at him: Mystery Surrounds Briarwood Killing. The article made his blood run cold with its matter-of-factness. He read how Charlie Ward had been repairing his roof on the 4th of July when a bullet dropped from the sky, piercing the back of his skull. He read how no one had any idea who killed the man, probably not even the killer himself. He read how ballistics tests were being conducted with the hope of identifying the weapon. Then the article went on to mention that Charlie Ward had been in top management at AT&T, that his wife was an account executive for some big advertising firm, and that he had a 15-year-old daughter. It was all so impersonal, but Michael kept on reading, and he did not stop until he had read every account in all of the papers for the past 2 days. Michael's mother was just taking a chicken casserole from the microwave when he walked through the back door. Michael stared at her for a minute as if he couldn't quite understand what she was doing there. Karen Mackenzie wiped a thin film of perspiration from her upper lip. "Good timing," she said, setting the covered dish on the table. Since it was already a few minutes past 7, Michael had figured that everyone else would have already eaten dinner. In fact, he had been counting on it. "Oh, Darcy called. She left a message on the answering machine, something about Stephen Chang's party." She stood on tiptoe to reach the plates in the cabinet. "Maybe you should call her before we sit down to dinner," she said over her shoulder. "This thing's too hot to eat right now anyway." Michael had forgotten about the party. He wondered why Darcy hadn't mentioned it at the pool that afternoon, why she had waited until she got home to call him, knowing that probably no one would be there. He continued to stare at his mother as she set the plates on the table. Her lightly freckled face and neck were covered with large red splotches. Her face always became blotchy in extreme heat. She shoved her short, damp hair away from her forehead, with her arm. "What?" Michael hadn't realized he'd been staring at her. He couldn't seem to think clearly. "Nothing," he said finally. "I guess I sort of forgot about the party." "Well, then, you better go call." She looked sadly at the steaming casserole. "What was I thinking? It's too hot out to eat something like this." Michael lifted the cordless phone from the kitchen wall and wandered into the living room. From his favorite recliner, strategically parked in front of the TV, Tom Mackenzie shouted, "What is the exterminator?" Josh shot him an outraged look from his place on the floor, 3 feet from the TV screen. "No, Dad. What is the Terminator? The Terminator," he repeated for emphasis. The contestant on the screen echoed, "What is the Terminator?" Michael felt the muscles in his neck tighten. "See," Josh said. "I knew that." His father flopped back in his chair. "It just came out wrong." "Yeah, tell that to Alex Trebek." Michael watched Josh and their father engaged in their nightly ritual. Josh had been planning for 2 years to win big bucks on Jeopardy! His father liked to think of himself as Josh's personal trainer, although Michael seriously doubted they even had such a thing for game show contestants. That was his dad for you. Whatever his sons aspired to, he was right behind them every step of the way. Michael sometimes wondered if maybe his father had his own unfulfilled dreams. Still, he seemed satisfied enough with his position as manager at the local A&P. For a few minutes he stood beneath the archway that separated the dining room from the living room, watching Josh and his dad. Then he took the cordless phone up to his room and dialed Darcy's number. He was certain that her afternoon message was her way of making sure he'd call her that evening. But all she said was, "What time are you picking me up?" The phone felt slippery in his hand. "I don't know. What time does the party start?" He couldn't believe he had said that. He no more wanted to go to this party than he wanted to go to Siberia, and at the moment, Siberia didn't sound half bad. 8, I think. Nobody'll be there till later. He could hear her soft breathing on the other end. So I guess 8:30's good? I just got home, he explained, as if that made any difference. Darcy didn't say anything for a while. Then she cleared her throat and said, "So you want to make it later?" He didn't want to make it at all. 8:30's okay. I already took a shower at the pool. "You okay?" she asked. He tried for a casual chuckle, but it stuck in his throat. "Fine. Why?" "Oh, nothing. See you at 8:30, he said, trying to put an end to the conversation. Then he hung up before she could ask any more questions. Michael fished around with his fork for chunks of chicken in the clump of mushy noodles on his plate. Josh had already finished eating and was back in front of the TV watching Wheel of Fortune. Tom Mackenzie helped himself to a can of beer from the refrigerator. He still had half a plate full of food. Only Josh, who according to his father had the appetite of a boa constrictor, had eaten everything. Michael's mother looked at their plates and sighed apologetically. "I guess I overcooked the noodles." Nobody said anything. "Well, I wouldn't have been so late tonight except the shop was a madhouse today." Karen Mackenzie worked at Briarwood Florist. What had begun as a part-time morning job 2 years earlier had evolved into a full-time position. Michael and his father were used to her talking about the place being a madhouse, especially around holidays. But it wasn't a holiday. Tom Mackenzie took a swallow of beer and frowned. A madhouse? In July? Michael's mother began scraping the food from her plate into the trash compactor. "It's that Ward funeral. Everybody's sending flowers, even though the family specifically asked people to make donations to charity instead." She sighed. "Only nobody paid any attention, of course, so we're swamped." Michael did not look up. He saw his mother's freckled hand slide deftly beneath his gaze and lift his plate. "Finished?" she asked. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "I read somewhere that he had a 15-year-old daughter. She probably goes to your school," his mother said, looking at Michael. "Do you know her?" He shook his head. The chicken casserole turned over in his stomach. Why hadn't he thought of that? Jenna Ward probably did go to Briarwood Regional. After all, the family was from Briarwood, although they lived on the other side of town. He hadn't recognized her from the picture in the newspaper, so he'd been sure he had never seen her before. Now he began to worry about what he would do if he saw her in the halls in September. Such a terrible tragedy. Slowly his mother lowered herself back into her chair, looking thoughtful. A stupid tragedy. His father pounded his fist on the table. In spite of himself, Michael flinched. That's what happens when irresponsible people play around with guns. His father squeezed Michael's shoulder. "That's why I've taught my boys to respect guns." Michael felt the pressure of his father's fingers digging into his collarbone. He wondered if his parents could see that he was shaking. Slowly, using all the muscle control he could muster, he stood up. Praying his legs would not give out on him, he turned to leave. "Sorry," he said. "I've got to go pick up Darcy." "Got a date with Darcy?" his father said. "Well, why didn't you say so? Here." Michael glanced back at his father and saw he was holding up the car keys. He looked very pleased with himself. Michael felt his face flush. What could he say? His father would never believe he'd pass up a chance to drive the car. So in the end, Michael simply took the keys, thanked his father, and headed upstairs to change his shirt. He told himself this was just another stone he had to swallow, and a small one by comparison. What was driving without a license compared to killing a man? A half hour later, he was standing at Darcy's front door. Darcy looked beautiful. Her thick hair hung almost to her waist in tight little waves. She wore pale peach shorts with a flowered top. Michael blinked in admiration. "You're actually on time," she said, stepping aside. Then she turned and shouted back through the front door that they were leaving for the party. Michael was glad she was ready to go. The last thing he felt like doing was talking to her parents. Darcy looked out at the road. "Hey, your dad let you have the car." "Yeah, well, maybe by the end of summer I'll have my own wheels." He said this because he thought it was expected. He'd been saving for a car almost a year, and all his friends, including Darcy, knew it. They drove toward Stephen Chang's house just as the street lights came on. The light filtered through the branches, spreading leafy patterns on the sidewalk and street. Darcy reached for his hand, and the gentle pressure of her soft skin hurt him in a way he had never known. He wanted to say something to her. He had even rehearsed it in front of the bathroom mirror. He would tell her they were seeing too much of each other, that they should start dating other people. But now, sitting next to Darcy, it sounded so phony. Everyone said that kind of crap when they wanted to break up with somebody, and the truth